Good afternoon and welcome to this week's Sonar Market Insights webinar. It's actually quite a special day as it's my work anniversary here at FreightWaves. So I was lucky enough to get some very nice Publix gummy bears from Zach. So feeling pretty good about that. Definitely a good start to our webinar here. We're on the precipice to steal one of your words of our TP19, Transparency 19 event in Atlanta, May 6th through 8th. If you've not signed up, we'd love to see you there. We're going to have Sonar training there. The whole team's going to be down there, from our market experts to sales team and customer engagement. So we'd love to see you. If you'd like more information, you can certainly find it at freightwaves.com/sonar or by simply Googling Transparency 19. And you can certainly see more information there. We have a few things we've added this past week in the form of some more intermodal data, some ocean container, some further granularity, and also a little change to how we're representing some reefer data as well. So we'll stick to our normal form here and go 25-30 minutes with some questions. Please ask throughout, and we'll do our best to get to any and all of them, either throughout the webinar or there at the end. And you can ask your questions at the Q&A bar on your GoToMeeting. Should be at the top of your screen. So without further ado, Zach Strickland, please get us started. What are we looking at here?
All right. Thank you, Brad, and congratulations.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'll let you know. So we released some intermodal rates in Sonar this week. You're looking at the Chicago to Atlanta intermodal rate. These do include all the accessorials and fuel surcharges involved in these rates. So it is not a complete one-to-one comparison for those of you that are thinking you can pull this chart up and say, well, let's pull up the DAT's Chicago to Atlanta and see what I'm looking at here, as I'm going to put this on the absolute scale so that we can clearly see them on the same playing field. So you see the intermodal rate is at $1.59. That does include fuel. That $1.77 for the DAT rate, spot rate, is...
Oh, your intermodal.
Oh, sorry. The intermodal rate is $1.77 and the DAT rate is $1.59. My apologies. So you cannot compare these two directly, even though this $1.59 does not have fuel in it. So that charge is probably going to be about roughly 31 cents higher-ish. So that's going to put your trucking rate a little higher than the intermodal spot rate, for instance. And those are spot rates for intermodal, about 53-foot containers shipping on the rail that we've collected. Anytime that you want to go check these out, these are currently put under the rail category. We probably will change that category soon enough because we are planning to add more intermodal data into this. But simply type in INTRM and it will pull up a list of all the lanes that are offered. I believe there's about 39 lanes that we offer for this intermodal data. This is good to know, especially in times where the trucking market is getting softer and softer. As the rates fall there, trucking becomes a lot more, a more attractive option for a lot of shippers out there because it's simply, you don't have to deal with drayage and transloading and all that kind of stuff. And the rail does involve some, connectivity issues from going from point A to point B. There's a lot of times there's a point A, B, C, and D for rail versus truck going A to B.
And so with the accessorials that are built into that intermodal rate, is that including, did you say, I may have missed it, does that include things like the dray cost and things of that nature?
It does not include dray in a lot of cases. This is simply the rail rate itself going from wherever the railhead is to the other rail terminal. So accessorials for rail are a lot different than trucking, and there's certainly, quite a bit. I'm not going to speak that I know this exactly, but trucking does have a lot more accessorial options than rail because rail is limited to its mode of transport, whereas trucking, you can have all sorts of docks and other variables involved on the delivery and pickup side that you don't have with rail.
And this is the first iteration. I know you mentioned roughly 30 lanes in here. I believe we're going to be upwards of 100 here in the coming weeks as we continue to receive the data and feed it into SONAR.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot of, I mean, most of the biggest lanes in the country are represented here. I think most people that operate in the space would know that a lot of the intermodal volume flows between Los Angeles, Chicago, Atlanta, Memphis, and Dallas, for instance. A lot of longer haul freight, as it, rail is typically a longer haul situation versus trucking, which is a lot of times a shorter length of haul. So that is in combination. We're here in a few weeks. For those users, be on the outlook for a new intermodal category here in a little bit. We just didn't want to spring it on anybody just yet, but you're going to have intermodal rates as well as rail traffic originated by intermodal, which is a count of rail carload volume for intermodal containers shipped via the rail. Something else that you can do in here is you can see the 2-week, quarterly change, weekly change, yearly change. We added all the delta values to this by lane, so you can see how they compare really easily in a year-over-year scenario or a week-over-week scenario, just to get a point of reference quickly if you're going through intermodal rates. So hopefully that helps. Other than that, we've also added, this should be a relatively familiar. Most people know about our China to North America's West Coast, FBX, which is the spot rate for shipping a 40-foot container from China to anywhere on the North American West Coast, which involves the ports of Los Angeles, Long Beach, but also down in Mexico, Vancouver, Canada, all that. This is the average spot market price for shipping those. That has been a weekly index thus far. We just added a daily index to this. And again, these are offered in all the lanes. All the lanes that we currently have for Freightos are offered in this same granularity. So simply type FBXD and these will pull up for you. And we've also added this global index, which is going to give you an average global rate for those of you interested in general rates for the entire globe, if you will, the Earth.
And for those who maybe aren't on the webinars every week, or we haven't talked about Freightos in quite a while though, but what's the importance of this data and understanding it and applying it to your decision making and to the inputs that you're considering when looking at your own business?
Yeah, no, anybody that's involved in freight needs to understand what's happening on the international shipping end. Most of, some of our largest companies in the country are the biggest international shippers. This involves companies like Target, Walmart, International Paper. These are all Home Depots, Lowe's. They all import a ton of goods into this country. And knowing, this is an indicator of how things are going to, like the amount of freight that is possible in the country as they get into the ports. They get offloaded and then they get stuffed into warehouses as they have been doing over the last several months, especially with all the tariff concerns and whatnot. There's a lot of potential energy in the freight market right now. And looking at this over the last year, and I've got the global one pulled up here, but you can see, even globally speaking, the largest lanes internationally for the United States go into the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach from Asia. Shanghai and Hong Kong, for instance, they're very big. Taiwan, they all have large number of port calls that go into the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach. And that freight gets transloaded and it either gets put on the rail and goes to Chicago, Dallas, Atlanta, or it gets put on a truck and it goes, maybe intra-regionally initially, or it gets, again, long hauled over the road to the big cities across the country and loaded into the DCs. This is a huge impact to the truckload market and anybody in transportation, supply chain management, and whatnot. Knowing what's happening out here in the water is going to give you a good, solid indicator of what's happening in the United States eventually. It's a good leading indicator. To illustrate that, we can pull up our good old favorite China to North American West Coast on the daily, and then you can pull up see here, OTVI.LAX, which is our outbound tender volume index for Los Angeles. I'm going to have to put that on a relative. I can get it to go on a relative. There we go. Oh, there we go. And you're going to see that there's a big correlation between all this inbound volume, and then eventually it gets pushed out into the out of Los Angeles. A lot of this volume here, the scale's not doing it justice, but a lot of this volume here was not shipped out and pulled out of Los Angeles until it got transloaded, and it's sitting in the ports, and they have to get this off the docks. They don't have enough space. So this big pull through has this ripple effect and out of Los Angeles. Obviously, all of that outbound Los Angeles isn't dependent on this exact data, but you can see that there's a clear correlation with a lot of the international shipping coming into the country. And again, pricing isn't always a one-to-one relationship with volume, as we've said numerous times, but this is a strong indicator of where to look, especially if container freight prices are increasing rapidly. That's a good indication that we're going to have a lot more volume and not simply a capacity management issue, as we have a lot of times in the truckload market. They can control the capacity a lot more easily in the international shipping market than they can in the national truckload market.
And as part of Zach's team, for those on the webinar that are current SONAR subscribers and that do receive our daily watch email, you'll probably recognize a new name in Henry Byers, who is really bringing has a lot of experience in 3PLs and freight forwarding. So really bringing some great insights into kind of that ocean shipping side and through the FBX data, and also working with our team to bring on a lot more data to provide more insights into the effect on the truckload market in the lower 48 states. So definitely keep an eye out for, I think it's one of his first updates was today, if I'm not mistaken, from writing in that daily watch email. But yeah, definitely keep an eye out for that. We're continuing to build out that aspect to provide more commentary and understanding of what's happening and how everything ties together from a volume standpoint across all these different supply chains and different modes. Did you want to show anything else here? We can maybe jump into how we revamped the reefer data and making it available regionally. So what are we looking at here? We've got the Midwest region, also available on the maps too, I think is definitely helpful to look at what we've got on a relative scale here.
Yeah, I'll fix that in a second.
Definitely.
But it is interesting to see this on a relative scale. I actually hadn't messed with this as much as I wanted to yet, but the reefer market is a lot different than the dry van market. You can obviously ship a lot of different commodities on reefer vans that don't necessarily require temperature controlling, but it represents roughly 15 to 20% of the freight market as it is. And so therefore there's simply not as much volume as the dry vans that are sitting out there, which is the gross majority of trucking in the United States. So what that means, though, is that this particular sector can be disrupted a lot more easily, as market imbalances exist constantly in the reefer sector. So we've added a way to organize this into regions because it gives it a little bit more depth. Since there's not as much localized demand, especially in markets that don't have a lot of agriculture or poultry or any item that requires temperature control, they're not going to be as detailed. So this is a good way for you to start if you're looking at reefer data. Start looking to see where should I send my reefer trucks, my reefer trailers, not reefer trucks, but the reefer trailers on a daily basis. The regions that are having the most disruption with reefer equipment right now. So you can see right now the Northeast is having little to no issue with getting coverage for its reefer demand. I think this is pretty pretty telling just in this one chart, even though I didn't pull up all of them because I didn't want to spend a lot of time typing, honestly.
I know you're getting lazy on the
Yeah.
stuff. And so what do we have? Is that the Northwest?
Yeah, the Northwest is a very cyclical market. There's a lot of agriculture up there. A lot of people don't know that. I mean, you have a lot of different harvests that happen throughout the year in the Northwest, but there's very specialized freight needs in the Northwest. And a lot of that revolves around reefer trailer equipment. Another area would be the Midwest. And you can see simply it's also, like the rest of the country right now, a little muted. The Midwest, if you want to see these regions on a map, we'll go ahead and illustrate that because that's a good way of going. And I'm gonna segue a little bit into where we get some of these regions from. So right now, for those of you that haven't seen this, I'm gone into the map feature and the freight data tab right here with a little truck and the little van attached to it. This is where you control the data that's going to show up on the map. And these granularity levels are going to tell you just how you can organize what individual shapes are available on the United States map. And right here is the region map. And I'm going to go in and select reefer tender rejection index. And this is going to tell you, relatively speaking, as it relates to the rest of the country in terms of color scale, where the highest reefer tender rejection rate is currently. So the dark blues mean that relative to the rest of the other regions, this is the highest, the most reefer tender rejected market, or reefer tender rejected region out there. The Northwest is second, and you have the Midwest and the Southwest being in a third and fourth, and then the rest are pretty soft right now, which to me is pretty interesting because the West Coast, this is the time of year for reefer freight, and also the Southeast is starting to have its volatility in terms of reefer demand. So for those reefer carriers out there, it's ironic to me that the Northwest is actually having more trouble covering their capacity. Now, it doesn't necessarily indicate that there is a large amount of volume up there, but it does mean that if you are operating in that space, you shouldn't have a lot of trouble finding a load coming out of that market, specifically on the spot market, as they're getting a lot higher tender rejection rates. The mountains, probably simply because it's the mountains. And
no one really wants to go there.
It's a hard, well, actually, a lot of what we've seen over the last couple of months, Denver, Salt Lake, having a lot more volume and volatility than we've seen in recent years. The West Coast itself has been very active this year. So this was the last thing that we added, along with, we did make this available in a state granularity as well. So you simply go in here and click on reefer tender rejection rate for the state, and that'll pull up if you want to see it on a state level.
Yep. And it looks like if we want to grab one of our first questions here, we can. And did you want to go over quick how we actually developed those regions as well, the U.S. regions?
The U.S. regions? Yes, I did. Sorry, okay. I totally forgot to do that. So yeah, the regions, I wanted to explain the regions because we have had some questions over the region development here. A lot of what you see here is developed over the course of, it's a combination of data analysis, but also the way that a lot of carriers and trucking companies view their regions, their region maps. So it's a mix. It obviously doesn't fit everybody's exact style or the way that they view the country, but for the most part, it's going to give the best idea of, freight flow in a general area. For the Southeast, for instance, the hub of that network, that hub of that region is the Atlanta market. If you look at this and you have interstates overlaid on top of it, you will see clearly a lot of the freight flows come in and out of Atlanta, flow into Birmingham, over to the Carolinas and back, out of Florida, gets distributed to the rest of the Southeast out here. Then from Atlanta, the big connection is to Dallas, going into the Southwest corridor where it gets distributed either into Texas or up to Oklahoma City. From there, you obviously have Los Angeles over here where you have Nevada and Phoenix, or Arizona, I should say. And that distributes throughout that region from Los Angeles. So think about each market as kind of a mini hub and spoke, if you will, for freight flows. And I think most people that operated either in an LTL network would probably already know this by the way that they had to design their networks. Truckload might be a little more dependent on the interstates and how they are divided in the country and how 40 flows across right here. Most people think about the country in terms of, a lot of truckload carriers think about it. Well, we operate mainly south of 40, north of 40, over here on the I-5 corridor and whatnot. But in general, freight patterns occur in this hub and spoke type pattern. You see in the Midwest here, you do have the Great Lakes interrupting you, but a lot of freight goes into Chicago, for instance, especially when we were talking about the rail earlier. A lot of this stuff gets railed up to Chicago and then distributed into Minneapolis, Milwaukee, over here to Detroit potentially. But there's a big corridor that runs from Chicago across to Philadelphia, which is our northeastern hub, if you will. And a lot of the data backs this up in terms of freight market patterns.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also, something that we've discussed and talk about, especially from a rejection standpoint, when looking at the various equipment types, it's kind of a capacity is not necessarily defined by a geographic region, also understanding that someone may not deadhead from Miami to Louisville, Kentucky for a load, of course, but certainly that kind of the greater regions, I think that played into why we wanted to represent the data like this as well. Kind of the greater region is a good representation of the feeling of capacity in that market, if that makes sense. And I think that was kind of another contributing factor as to why we wanted to display this data from a region basis as well.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So other than that, Brad, is there somewhere else did you want to go with? You were asking a question a second ago.
Oh, you got your U.S. regions.
Yep.
So I feel good about that. I think we have a couple questions that we can grab here. Do we ever plan on getting into the rate game, specifically on a mass scale, a competitor to DAT or multi-lane? From a roadmap standpoint, I don't think that is definitely not, our goal or what we're setting out to do. We certainly think, they, especially speaking of DAT, they do a phenomenal job of presenting pricing and spot marketing pricing at that to the industry. And what we've kind of tried to do is not only create this, aggregate platform with a ton of different surrounding data sets for you to access easy all in one place, but kind of the speed of the data from a load transaction standpoint that we believe is a pretty good indicator of current market conditions. So I think we kind of want to stay in our lane of where we're headed right now, if that answers that question. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Zach.
Yeah, no, I do a little bit. The idea, the rate, we may get more rate data in here into SONAR, but that's obviously not our primary goal. We're not trying to compete with DAT. If we did get more rate data in here, it would be in coordination with DAT. And it wouldn't be as a competitor because we're partnered with DAT as the freight futures. And we rely on their information pretty exclusively for that. So, but the point of a lot of our data is to be something aside from DAT. Even if we were to get all that rate data, we still have, a lot of what we do is trying to get in front of rates, because as we talked about on here, a lot of times rates can be filled with emotion or sentiment, or it's very subjective. And this data is action. This is what carriers are actionably doing right now. They're actively doing this. And as you look at this indice right here, the tender rejection index will tell you this is what carriers are doing. You may not see this in a rate. The fact that they're rejecting their loads right now means that they're going to go to route guide position number 2, 3. Their rates are increasing inside of their route guide, but they're not necessarily increasing in the spot market.
I think that's a really important point, because I think, there's a lot of the want and the need to directly tie and correlate this data to the spot market or spot pricing data, which it certainly, I think they move together in a lot of instances. But I think that example is really important to understand, that you just outlined, that, depending what the current market conditions are and what the contract rates are and what the spot market's paying, all of this movement and volatility that we see essentially up and down potentially the routing guide may not necessarily even be felt in the spot market or in pricing. And you look like you're typing feverishly. So I'm gonna let you run with it here.
No. I show this example to a lot of people, and it's the DAT rate overlaid on top of the outbound tender rejection index for Los Angeles to Dallas, one of the bigger lanes in the country, a very predictive lane, if you will, for the market conditions. And you see this nice smooth upswing and DAT's spot market rate, very smooth trend transition from March to June. But you see the tender rejections actually had a lull right here. And volumes definitely come down in April. And we did have a stabilizing effect in April of last year. Well, everybody had just come off a hot 2017 thinking, and a lot of them were told like, hey, capacity's tightening. Actually, capacity was getting looser in the month of April, but rates still went up. So that's kind of the sales pitch or the salesmanship of a lot of these rates. And sometimes they don't know. They're simply just, and I was a pricing guy and I didn't know either, but I would just operate off of what I already knew happened in the year before, which is what most people do. With this data, you can go out there and see what's happening right now, today, or yesterday, I should say. And you have a lot more insight into this. And the way that a broker could use this would to help negotiate their rates down, on the carrier end. Or a carrier could use this and say, well, rates are going up, man. We can still take care of it. So there's a lot of different angles you could take, but you can know that you're going to have leverage with the information, because like my mentor used to tell me back when I first started in pricing, information is power. And this is definitely a type of temperature gauge to the bigger freight market.
Knowledge is power. And we have maybe one more question here. Is there any underlying reason for increases or volatile moves in the Freightos indices that seem to happen at the beginning of each month? Which is an interesting question. And I think our freight forwarding expert was actually just discussing that. They do regular rate increases on those lanes. So actually, and I believe and I have your contact info, so we can reach out direct to go in more detail, but I believe it's the 15th of each month, or the 1st and the 15th.
They have schedules.
Yeah.
They have schedules that they will actually, they actually post a lot of their rates weeks in advance for the way that they operate. So a lot of times they are setting the rate well before the market conditions may shift or change. And a lot of times that's just, they know that Chinese New Year is right here. So they're going to start their void sailings or blank sailings, if you will. And that's going to drop the rates ahead of time. But as market conditions evolve and change, they obviously change those on a weekly or daily basis, just to make sure that they're as current as possible. So there is some forward thinking involved here, because these ships move a lot slower. It's not like a truck where you're going to have a lot of 2 and 3 day deliveries. These are 21-day sailings, so they have to have something in place well ahead of time.
Yep. And we're coming up on the end of the half hour here, so we'll again stick around for some questions if they continue to pour in.
Yeah. Do you want to tell them about upcoming weeks?
The upcoming weeks. There's a couple upcoming weeks.
We're going to change the format here in a few weeks.
Oh yes, we're gonna change the format. I believe starting
after T19,
after Transparency 19, May 6th through 8th. We're gonna repurpose these webinars to be. You may know more about that.
Yeah, they're going to be more training oriented, more 101s, a lot more just reiterating a lot of the basic functionality of SONAR. Obviously, that's subject to change here in a few weeks, but for now, the format is going to be a lot more 101, a lot more basic user functionality, they'll still introduce new indices, if you will, as they come on board, but it won't be as, it'll be a little bit more geared towards the functionality and what users can do to get, existing value out.
Yep, absolutely. And you can, of course, still catch Zach on the FreightWaves Now videos that come out daily. He'll still be talking plenty on there if you haven't had enough of them on Wednesday at 2 o'clock. Me, I'll probably be hiding out and not be on the air. So I escaped a bullet there, but no, we'll probably be dropping in every now and again on a Wednesday. And of course, always available for our current existing customers, and of course, those that are interested in learning more about Sonar, and of course, the variety of ways you can get a hold of us, freightwaves.com/sonar. And we'd love to chat and talk more Sonar with you guys.
All right. Well,
yeah, we'll hang around for a few more minutes if questions come in. Otherwise, we'll see you guys next week at 2 Eastern for your Sonar Market Insights webinar. All right, looks like no more questions for this week, so we're going to go ahead and sign off. Thanks again for joining us on the Sonar Market Insights webinar. We hope to see you guys at Transparency 19 in Atlanta, May 6th through 8. Again, for more information, go to freightwaves.com/transparency19, I believe is the actual site. So go ahead and check that out, or just Google Transparency 19. It's probably easiest. Transparency19.com, I'm being told through my earpiece, for anyone that's still on here listening. Thanks again, and we'll see you guys next week.